This video is going to take a closer look at forms on your site and how you can use forms either to modify existing ones or to create new ones for learning activities, for collecting information, however you might want to use them on your site. Let me go to the front end first to talk about some of the forms that are already on your site. So right now, if you go to the footer, there's a form here for contact information. There's also a sample contact page set up. In the sample course, we've got an example of an embedded form that we use inside a course as well. So in this case here, we can go to the gravity form example, and this is how it's set up. There's a lot of options on here. This is just a sample one though. So we use forms in a lot of different ways, including when people are registering for the course, or if they're creating an account on your site, then the sample registration page we have set up is also a form. So there are a lot of different instances of form types that are on the site. Now, forms have their own menu entry over here. So I'm going to go into forms, and I want to start off by taking a look at the forms that are already there. So there are 5. And a couple of these I already covered in the demonstration at the beginning of this video. So there's the one on the contact page, there's the contact us footer form, there is the registration form, so this is when we're creating a new account, and then there's just some other forms on there as well. So let me go in, I'm going to start off with a more simple form. So let's start off with the contact us footer form, as it is the most straightforward. So I'm going to start off by editing the form, and this lets me edit the fields that are on the form, that are part of the form. So if I click on these, you can see the first thing we're collecting is the first name. So this is a single line text field. There are really no restrictions around what people can put in here. It's a required field, and this can get a bit overwhelming. I know that. So there are a lot of field types. You can see them over here. There's even more once you start drilling in. They all have different options and they can be set up differently, and we will include some links to documentation for more complex use cases for the forms. I'm going to keep things really simple for the video, or as simple as I can. I'm just going to go through a couple of quick examples. So again, user's going to see that the first name is being collected. It is required in this case. Instead of using a label here, so instead of having a label on top here, in this case, because we're trying to keep the footer form as condensed as possible, let me show you that again. So we don't have a label on top of each of these things. In fact, it's not even showing that it's required right now. So we could change that just if you wanted some kind of visual indicator. That's not great actually. Anyway, you could modify the text here. You can see we're using the placeholder, but you could use the top label as well, whatever is easier there. Field size you can control here, and normally you're not going to have to set anything else up, but there certainly are controls for most more complex scenarios. Anyway, this is a simple first name collection field. Beneath that, you can see we've got an email field. So it is again a required field. It's just using the placeholder again. There's no validation, and it's just a medium field size again. You can see for placeholders, it is possible to use some variables. If the user signed in, we could populate their email address, something like that. So there are some options around that. And then down at the bottom here, you can see we're collecting some paragraph text. So what is the actual message that's being submitted? So you can see, let me go into here. This is a medium one as well. We've got the placeholder again with the text. And once again, we're not using anything here. We could have a rich text editor if we wanted to allow users to have the additional controls. They could change the styling then, add links if they wanted to, but we don't want to. We just want to keep it really simple. So this is where the page you're setting up all the fields from. And there are a lot of controls. You can even have like page breaks if you want to, and have fields across different pages. So on this page, maybe I want a couple of radio buttons, and I can do things like that. Let me go ahead and just delete all those changes though. So It's a very flexible form tool. There's a lot you can do with it. While there aren't examples on your LP site, you can also use it for things like course evaluation, um, collecting other kinds of feedback, assignment uploads you can even use it for. So if I wanted something like that, I could do a file upload. So if I wanted a user to send something to me, I could do this. There are a lot of different ways you can use forms. Once you've set up the fields and they are configured the way you want, it is important that you spend some time going through the different settings as well. So I'm not going to save my changes. I'm just going to go straight to the settings here. So here there are some controls. These are not things you would generally have to modify. If you want to change the button text, you can here. One thing that is important though, if you have any public facing forms, registration form, contact form, things like that, that are on public pages, it is a good idea to turn this on just to reduce the amount of spam that forms might collect. Normally we don't see any on the custom Gravity Forms registration pages that we set up. So it's going to be pretty unusual to have spam anyway, but just to help reduce the risk of bots submitting things, having this enabled is helpful. So these are form settings for this particular form. The next thing we want to take a look at are confirmation behaviors. So this controls what happens when a user submits the form successfully. So in this example, we've got text being shown. So it's going to say, thanks for contacting us. We'll be in touch soon. If I edit that, we can take a closer look at that. So it is just simple text right now. Okay, that's the problem here is that it's all white text. So yeah, very difficult to show here just because it is the white text because again, it's down here. We want it to stand out against the dark heading. So let me just show you how that works though. So if I say my first name is Ryan so for the email, I'm just going to put in test email and I'm going to say this is my message and I'll go ahead and submit that. So when I do that, it's going to reload the page. This one's a little confusing because it does go to the top. I could change behaviors on that. So I could do an AJAX submission instead. All right, so it's down at the bottom of the page here with the message that it's been submitted. It is also possible to modify that so that it doesn't do the page refresh, and I'm going to take a look at that in a second as well, because there's an important consideration there when you're actually adding it to pages. So anyway, this is the confirmation text that's shown on the same page where the form was. So the form disappears. This is shown instead when you're doing this type of confirmation. You could also, instead of having a text confirmation, you could redirect to another page. So what might be useful here as an example is if you set up a thank you page or a confirmation page that just says something like, thanks for your submission, it's been received, we'll be contacting you within 2 business days or something like that. You could have a page that has additional controls, additional text. It's better styled than a confirmation message. So if you want to take that to the next level, then this is a good way to do it. The next section is for notifications. So notifications define when a form is submitted, what happens in terms of sending data to other people to confirm to the user that it's been received. Like if you want to send something by email, you would be using a notification. So in this case, we're using an admin notification, and you can tell that it's turned on because it's got the green switch on right now. So if I edit that, let's take a look. So here's the name of it. What we're doing here is we're controlling who this goes to. So these braces are variables, then it indicates a variable, and you can see some of the options in this drop down. Clicking any of these drop downs would show you, what some of the options are. If you wanted it to go to a specific user, then you could just put in their email address here. You can control who it's from here, so who sent this. Usually what we do is make it so that submissions are from whatever the user's name is that submitted it. The email itself comes from the site, so there's going to be a problem. You shouldn't use the from email as the user's email. Because it's being sent through the LP site, it doesn't recognize the domain that the user might be using for their email as an authorized sender. So it can trigger spam blockings and other issues. So it's better if you continue to show that it's from an email address associated with the domain of your LP site, and just change the reply to address to the user's email. That's what we generally do. And then it will get successfully sent. The other way, yeah, there's a problem with spam, and then with some mail providers, including Yahoo, it will just get blocked entirely. There won't be any authorization, so it'll be treated as an invalid email, and it will be blocked. So down here we've got the subject line. Again, you can include variables in here. And then by default for the message, we just include everything that the user has submitted in this message section. So if I wanted to, I've got that specific notification set up for admins, but maybe I want my own that has different information. So I could create a new notification that's test notification, and I'm going to say that it's to me, and that it's from, I'm just going to say that it's from the site. So I will use the from email, and I'm going to use the user's email address again. And I'm just going to say, and maybe I only want to include one field in this notification, so I'm just going to say, here's what the message is. And then I'm going to save that. And if I go back to notifications, you can see that there are 2 notifications turned on now. Okay, so these are the steps that would go into setting up the user notification. When you get access to your site, your LP site, you will want to go in and probably change perhaps the email notification, the admin notification. So if you want to go into a different address, it's safest to leave it as the admin email address. So once again, that's the email address that shows up under this section here. So it's taking that email address. That's the one you generally would want to use anyway, so it might be fine to leave this notification. But if it's going to different recipients or a different email address than the site email, that's a good thing to include there. So now that that's set up, I'm not going to go into detail at this time about these two. I'm going to leave the active campaign pieces to another screencast. So again, you'd have to set up basically a mapping to go from your form into the CRM, just to map the fields from one to the other. And user registration I'm going to cover in another topic, because that one gets a little complex as well. So let's take a look just quickly at, again, how this form that we created is set up on the site. So I'm going to just reload the page. I'm going to go here to open up the home page again. So this is the form we created. This one is in the footer. So if we remember back to when we were talking about the design and how the widgets are set up and the footer is configured, that is under the design section. And I want to go into widgets. And here is where we have the widgets for the footer. So in this case, here is the footer. Now I did want to change 2 things here, just so you're aware of these things. So what's important here is, first I want to turn on Ajax so you can see the difference. I want to show the difference in submissions so that it's not a page reload. So you might want to use Ajax, and then I need to increase the tab index because I noticed that my tab order was off. And for people that do use keyboard, this can throw things off if you don't have tab indexes defined. So just make it something higher than 1 and make it unique if you have multiple forms on the page. So I'm just going to use 15 as a random number that I know is not used elsewhere on the page. And again, keep in mind too that when you have a contact form in the footer, it's going to be on every page. So again, the tab index is important because if you do have forms somewhere else on the site, then the tab index could be conflicting and it could cause complications. So again, I don't want to show any of these things, but I've made the change to the Ajax and to the tab order. So I'm just going to reload the page again so you can see the difference in the submission now. So this time I click on, I'm going to say Ryan and test, and you can see I can navigate just by using the tab key. I was using mouse. I'm going to say test message. And now I'm going to go ahead and click submit. And this time you can see it didn't reload the page. It didn't scroll to the top. It kept me right down here, and right away it showed me the confirmation message. So it's probably a good idea for any forms like this, especially if they're lower on the page and you want to show immediate feedback and you're not using some kind of redirect for the confirmation. Probably better to use the AJAX submission method. And if you make sure again to set the tab index. If you're using shortcodes, so you're doing this on some other kind of page, you're doing a shortcode for the gravity form, there is documentation. Tab index can be set as an attribute. AJAX submission can also be set that way as well. So let me just go back really quickly so you can see that. If I go to the sample course again, I want to go to the form, and I wanted to show you how that shortcode was set up. So outside of the widget process. So you can see here there is an option to add the forms. It's got the same things here. So we've got AJAX controls and tab index. We can select the form here. Populating these values, again, when you publish that or when you insert it, it's just going to enter them this way. So you can see this is the ID of the form. We do show the title. We don't show the description. Submission is by AJAX. That means there's not a page reload, and we are defining the tab index. So that's how it works. That is a basic introduction to forms in terms of setting the forms up. Before I close the video, I'm just going to quickly show you how to check entries then. So again, we've got the notification behaviors. So you would know by email that things have been submitted, but you can also see them anytime on the site. So if I go into forms and then entries here, it says there are no entries. That's because I'm not looking at the contact us footer form, which does have my 2 test submissions. So for either of these, I can go into them and view them. So I can see exactly, what all the details are, when it was submitted, who was submitted from, if the person was signed in, then it's got their user information all in there. So all of the entries are stored that way. One, you can control here which columns you want in there. The only time this does get a bit complex that we see on e-learning sites is potentially when you are using survey type questions, Likert questions, things like that. You can get summary level data from this, but in a lot of cases you'll want to export the information. So there is a usable view for those types of questions, and you can see it at a summary level. But for analysis, you might still want to export the information. So in this case, I've only got that form with a couple of entries set up. But you can see you can include, these would become columns then in the CSV file, and you can set a date range as well. And then you will get a file that you can open in Excel or another spreadsheet tool to take a look at the entries in more detail, perform more advanced filtering, things like that. So that's how you'd see entries and how you would also export them if you wanted to do more analysis. There are some basic settings here. If you need to set up something like, so for the active campaign integration later on, you would need some settings here. And then user registration, you have to define the form if you're changing anything compared to what we set up as the default on your LP site. So at this point, again, I've talked a lot about what's possible with forms, how to set up forms. Take a look at the help documentation, look at the examples that have been set up, try some forms on your own, use different attributes, see what works best for your audience and for your site, and see if you can build forms that make sense for your context. And hopefully this screencast does help you get started in that area.